In the past few days, weeks, and in some people's cases even months, the 2023 NASCAR schedule has been one of the biggest points that needs to be talked about. And while I don't think that every change that might need or should take place is going to take place with it, still talking about the overarching changes that can be done is a big thing to keep pushing to let NASCAR know what fans want. And one thing that I've noticed that fans have wanted, desired, and in some cases seen as necessity is to have NASCAR branch out and have pretty much every track have only one race. So today we're going to kind of look into this and see what the merit of this argument might be, what the argument in general entails, and then see if it's something that NASCAR can do or even should do. So, breaking down the schedule right now, and yes, 2023 we know will be a bit different, but right now, there are two types of tracks points racing-wise. Tracks with one date and tracks with two dates. Currently, 18 tracks have one race date on the schedule, and 9 tracks have 2 races. Those 9 tracks are Daytona, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Atlanta, Richmond, Martinsville, Talladega, Darlington, and Kansas. Of the 27 tracks that have any kind of different layout, again, we're not counting the Bristol and Charlotte tracks as there are 2 different layouts for those races, 18 are run only once, meaning about 2/3 or 66% of those tracks are run just once. But let's say we up that number a bit. Yes, it's probably not feasible to have every track only have one race just because of ratings, because of travel, because of just straight up tradition. But let's say we get to 80% of the current 27 tracks having one date, being 22. Well, that would mean that just 5 tracks would have to lose one date and go down to that one date for a new track to come in. So in reality, it would make for 28 total tracks having it because of the 5 new ones out of 36 races, meaning 78% of the races are at different tracks and about 88% of the tracks are visited only once. That is definitely a breakdown I think that NASCAR fans can get behind. But you might be asking a big question, and it's probably a big question that needs to be answered before going further. What's the big deal about going to tracks twice or once? Well, there's a few things that kind of add into making this a big deal. Number 1 is schedule diversity. NASCAR fans want a schedule that isn't cookie cutter. Much of the criticism of the NASCAR schedule for years has been the fact that a lot of the tracks look the same or they go back to the same ones over and over and over again. If you remember in the 2000s, the mile-and-a-half cookie cutter era was at its peak, and it seemed like every other week NASCAR was going to one of these tracks. They didn't have terrible racing, but it was at the expense of short track racing as well as unique racetracks overall. Well, at NASCAR's peak in 2005, 15 tracks were on the schedule twice, meaning that only 6 tracks were on the schedule just once. Since then, again, 17 years later, there have been a couple tracks that have dropped their second date that used to be on the schedule back in 2005. These tracks are Auto Club, Bristol, Texas, though they do have the All-Star race, Dover, Pocono, and Michigan, and New Hampshire. Though there are some that added a second date, but not as many as what was previously on the schedule. Las Vegas, Kansas, and Darlington all added a second date, with Darlington getting their second date back that they lost in the 2005 season. Nowadays, in the last 17 years, NASCAR has went from 22 to 27 tracks that they go to during the season, adding schedule diversity and making the schedule a bit more fun and having a bit of a fresh air approach to it. With the overall addition of these tracks, the cookie cutters have been reduced, while road courses and oddball tracks like the Bristol Dirt Track and the upcoming Chicago Street Course can rise up. But this, especially with the street course, opens up another argument to why this is important. It opens up NASCAR to new markets. In recent years, NASCAR has went to new markets and has returned to others. The ones that they've went to have included Austin, Texas with Circuit of the Americas, Los Angeles, California with the LA Coliseum, St. Louis, Illinois, Missouri, depending on what side you want to talk about, with Worldwide Technology Raceway. The entire state of Wisconsin gets a race with Road America, well, until next year, because Chicago, Illinois gets a race with the street race there, and then the Nashville area in Tennessee gets a race with the Nashville Super Speedway, and maybe in the future the Nashville Fairgrounds. With more open spots on the schedule, it gives more opportunities for more areas of the country to use. NASCAR has talked about going to a street race perhaps in Denver, Colorado, an area completely untapped when it comes to NASCAR. Also, the Pacific Northwest, for instance, with Portland, could get a race. Canada could get a race. Mexico could get a race if the schedule allows there to be more open spots for them to do so. And these potential new markets can slowly but surely get small pockets of fans to latch onto the sport and, over time, grow in different areas NASCAR never could imagine before this. And this will help in a big way as well for multiple reasons with attendance. Attendance is, in a lot of ways, majorly helped by the fact that tracks will go from 2 to 1 date. A lot of these tracks back in NASCAR's heyday could bring over 100,000 to 2 races, but nowadays that's just impossible to do. Even Daytona and Talladega can't do that. And when you look at some of these tracks in the last couple of years that have went to 1 date, the attendance has been helped immensely. Pocono had nearly 100,000 and was at a damn near sellout this year. Michigan had their best infield capacity since 2012 and probably their best grandstand capacity since at least 2015. And Dover's 55,000 was a near sellout for the reduced capacity and was the highest that they've had at that track in recent memory. Now, there are some outliers like New Hampshire. I'm not going to lie about that, but a lot of that has to do with markets that NASCAR is just not tapped into as well as markets in Pocono, Michigan, and Dover. Meanwhile, tracks like Kansas, Richmond, and Texas struggle to fill seats. The Kansas race earlier this year saw maybe 15,000 in the grandstands, and it was pretty pitiful. Richmond has went from having over 30 straight sellouts in the 2000s to half the capacity they used to have, and even then, it's really hard for them to get over halfway full. And Texas is a struggle just in general to get seats because of poor racing and also the fact that they have a ton of seats. You can have 50,000 at Texas and it'll look empty. So if you go down to 1 date and combine the 2 crowds that you get for it, well, maybe you bring in 70, 80,000 fans, which to NASCAR's current standards is really, really good. While better attendance doesn't necessarily affect the bottom line of NASCAR, the visual of full stands is big for the atmosphere of the overall broadcast and adds into it, which in a lot of ways is really big in getting people into the sport. I can say that when I watched the 2005 Daytona 500 for the first time at 7 years old, hearing the crowd noise, seeing the big and just absolutely bonkers crowd reacting to the race got me more invested watching on TV. So that's a really big piece of the puzzle that people don't look at for that reason. So what's the solution here? Well, tracks with 2 dates can go down to 1. And let's go with the basis that I talked about earlier of 5 tracks losing one of their dates. You have to remember that these tracks are owned by ISC and SMI. So if you go down for one of their dates, they're probably going to want one back, or at least something they can control. So let's go and see these 5 tracks. I say take one of the Kansas races away, probably the one in the spring, and give it to Chicagoland Speedway, a popular intermediate that'll have great racing and has a fan base that seems to be rejuvenated in bringing the Speedway back. As for Richmond, as much as it sucks to take away a short track, you gotta give Road America their date back. With over 100,000 both weekends in the last 2 years, they deserve the date for that reason alone. With SMI tracks, well, Las Vegas Motor Speedway should definitely lose a date, as it just doesn't really feel like it earned that date. It feels more like a pet project of the company itself. In its place, let's go to a short track in Nashville Fairgrounds instead. Then another SMI track should lose a date, and I think that is Atlanta Motor Speedway. The summer attendance was bad, and while you can blame the weather on that, Atlanta attendance in general has never really been that good, even in NASCAR's heyday. So, since we're taking out a race from that North Carolina, Virginia area, let's give them one back with North Wilkesboro. Again, it doesn't have to be next year, but over time. And then let's go back to ISC and have a track that maybe NASCAR can lease out. Let's get rid of one Phoenix race. That way it can have the championship race as its sole race of the season, and instead go to another short track with the Iowa Speedway. That way, with all of this, you still have 2 races at Daytona, Talladega, Martinsville, and Darlington, respecting the tradition, history, and of course, the ratings that they bring in. Attendance, ratings, and good racing all will win out in this solution, in my opinion. And when you look at the net positives and negatives of what we gain and lose, I think NASCAR fans can be happy as well. You get 3 short tracks back at the expense of 1, so going from 5 short track races to 7. You get a popular intermediate back, but a net loss of 1 intermediate since you have 1 less race at Kansas and at Las Vegas. And then you also reduce the super speedways so it doesn't get oversaturated, and you gain back a popular road course that most hardcore fans want. Overall, I think that if you're wanting to have most tracks have 1 date, this is the best way you can do it. But I'm just one guy, and this is just my opinion. Now, I want to know what you think. So let me know down in the comments below. What tracks, if any, should have 2 dates, and what should go down to 1? While you're at it, leave a like on this video. Share this video and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you to all my channel members for your continued support. And until next time, have a good one.